Have you ever wondered what it truly means to be a hero in the modern world, where most people walk past each other with their eyes glued to glowing screens, where strangers rarely speak and danger is just another story in the evening news? What would you do if you saw someone pointing a gun at a complete stranger in the middle of a busy city street? Would you freeze, would you run, or would you step forward and risk everything for someone you've never met? Today's story is not fiction. It is a chilling real-life reminder that heroes still walk among us quiet, unseen, and uncelebrated until fate forces them into the spotlight for a moment that changes everything. Not just for them, but for everyone watching. This is the story of Elijah Boone, a young black man who made that choice on a crisp fall morning in the heart of Manhattan, and in doing so not only saved the life of a stranger, but also exposed a hidden web of corruption, power, and human decency that shocked a city to its core and left the world asking the simple but profound question, does quiet courage still matter in a world obsessed with noise? It was an ordinary morning, or so it seemed. Maya William, the heiress to one of New York's largest real estate fortunes, stepped out of her father's corporate headquarters, her mind racing with thoughts of betrayal and fear. She had discovered something dark in her father's empire, something that could destroy reputations, ruin careers, and cost her own life. I want you to pause here and think, because this is something we rarely see when we picture the rich and powerful. We think of luxury, of security, of people who have it all. But what we forget is that at the top of these towers are often cages made of fear, threats, and secrets, and Maya was right in the middle of one such cage. She held in her hand evidence of corporate espionage, illegal data leaks, and blackmail worth millions, evidence that Philip Noor, her father's most trusted lieutenant, had been selling company secrets to competitors. And when she found out, someone made it clear that her life was now measured in hours, not years. This is where the story twists from boardrooms to blood, because as Maya stood on 33rd Street frozen by fear, an attacker emerged from the crowd. His gun raised, his finger tightening on the trigger. But before that fatal shot could reach its mark, a blur moved between them, fast, decisive like lightning. Elijah Boone, a man she had never seen before, threw himself into the path of the bullet. This moment is burned into memory forever, because what kind of person does that without hesitation, without knowing who they're saving, without expecting reward? Heroes in real life do not wear capes, they wear work clothes. Elijah was dressed in a blue maintenance uniform, his face hard from years of quiet labor, unnoticed by the world. But in that moment, he was a human shield, a sacrifice on instinct alone. The bullet struck his shoulder, spinning him to the pavement, blood staining his sleeve as he collapsed at Maya's feet. Now think of this. It wasn't until 30 minutes earlier that Maya had received the first warning. A burner phone slipped onto her windshield bearing only one line. Some secrets are worth killing, for the line that turns ambition into terror, that makes boardroom disputes deadly, and here she was face to face with what that warning meant. And yet someone else had paid the price meant for her. As the crowd screamed and scattered, and traffic halted in chaos, Maya knelt beside the bleeding stranger, her silk scarf pressed to his wound, trying to stop the crimson bloom spreading across his chest. And I want you to understand this, because it's more than just drama. This happens every day somewhere in America, where the unexpected courage of a stranger stops an ordinary day from becoming a tragedy. I think of stories like Rick Rescorla, the security chief at the World Trade Center on 9/11, who refused to abandon the building and personally led hundreds to safety at the cost of his own life. Or Wesley Autry, the construction worker who leaped onto subway tracks to save a man having a seizure. Ignoring the deadly train approaching, these are real men, real choices, moments that define lives not in hours but in seconds. Back to the street, Maya whispered shaky promises of survival to Elijah. As paramedics arrived, the crowd parted. The police secured the shooter, wrestled down by construction workers and a delivery biker. The city's rush frozen in this impossible scene. And here's the strange irony. Maya didn't even know his name. He wasn't family or friend, just a man who decided that saving a stranger mattered more than saving himself. And isn't that the rarest courage of all? In the ambulance, as sirens wailed, Maya held Elijah's hand, refusing to let go, ignoring the calls buzzing on her phone. Her father's assistant, the board security, Philip Noor, all demanding her attention. But her focus was here on this quiet, fading man whose life was ebbing from the wound he took for her. and the weight of guilt and gratitude filled her chest. Because in her world, people scheme for wealth, for power, but no one risked everything for nothing, and yet this man had. At St. Luke's Trauma Center, doctors worked urgently, surgeons moved like dancers in battle clothes, and Maya waited blood on her hands. Silk coat ruined mind racing with fear, not for her secrets now, but for this stranger who had changed everything she knew about honor and sacrifice. And this is where the story leaves the headlines and enters something deeper, something rarely seen in stories about wealth and power, because Elijah Boone was not supposed to matter. He was not supposed to change the fate of anyone, let alone a billionaire's daughter. And yet here she was, breathless hands, shaking, whispering prayers in a hospital waiting room for a man whose name she still did not know. And I want you to think of this in your life right now. How many people do you pass every day, unnoticed, silent ghosts in the crowd who might one day be the hand that saves you? The surgeon finally emerged, his voice calm. The news good. Elijah was stable. The bullet missed the artery he would live for now, and Maya could breathe again. But the weight of what had happened pressed into her chest because survival was not the end of this story. It was only the terrifying beginning of something much bigger, a chain of truths and lies that would unravel everything she thought was safe. As the hours dragged on inside the cold, sterile walls of St. Luke's Trauma Center, Maya Williams sat motionless, staring through the glass of the ICU window, while machines hummed and monitors beeped in quiet rhythm around the man who had saved her life. A man she still did not know the name of. It was strange, unsettling even because for all her wealth, all her power, all her famous connections, it had taken the courage of an absolute stranger to keep her alive, and that thought would not leave her mind. The truth was that Maya had spent her life surrounded by people who smiled in boardrooms, who shook hands in corporate meetings, who dined in glittering charity galas, but none of them, none of the executives, the investors, the journalists would have thrown themselves in front of a bullet for her. Not even her father, and here lay Elijah Boone, a man dressed in a Navy maintenance uniform who chose instinctively to do the impossible, to risk death for someone whose world and life were as far from his. As the stars from the pavement, this is where the human part of the story deepens. Because if you strip away titles, wealth, and influence, what remains is something more primal, something real. The choice to protect, not because of fame or reward, but because in that single second, someone else's life mattered more than your own. I can't help but think of Wesley Autry, again the New York subway hero in 2007, who jumped onto the tracks to save a man having a seizure, dragging him into the drainage trench as a train roared overhead. He had no idea who the man was, no reason to risk his life, but he did, and when asked why later, he simply said, "I saw someone in trouble, and I did what I thought was right." And that echoes here in Elijah's quiet, unconscious body, the real heroism that asks for nothing and gives everything. Maya stood by his bedside, unsure of what to say. Her heart tight, her fingers brushing the hospital sheet as she watched the faint rise and fall of his chest. Then, without warning, his hand twitched. His fingers moved weakly and she bolted upright, whispering softly, "Hey, can you hear me?" Her voice trembling. He groaned a soft, cracked sound, his eyelids fluttering, then slowly opening his eyes, brown, warm, confused. Met hers, blurred by pain and medication. "But alive, you're in St. Luke's ICU," she said gently. "You were shot. You saved my life." His brow furrowed, struggling to remember. "I got shot," he whispered. Maya nodded, her throat tight. You saved me." He grunted, trying to sit up, but pain slammed into him, and he fell back, wincing hard. "Don't move," she said, placing a gentle hand on his chest. "You're safe now. Just rest." He turned his head, squinting at her. "The woman from the street." "Yes, Maya William," she said softly. His eyes widened slightly, recognition flickering, the name settling. "I've heard of you, real. Estate princess?" She smiled faintly. "Not my favorite title, but yes," he sighed, shaky. "You've got enemies, apparently." She nodded grimly. "Someone wanted me gone because I found something I wasn't supposed to see. Something they would kill to keep quiet." He let out a quiet breath. "Sounds familiar," she tilted her head, curious. "What's your name?" "Elijah," he said, "Elijah Boone." And there it was, a name, finally something real to hold on to in the chaos. Thank you, Elijah. She said, truly, you didn't know me, and yet you did this. You looked scared, he murmured, and I just moved without thinking. She smiled warmly. Well, you moved into a bullet, he chuckled weakly. Been through worse. She studied him, square jaw, rough stubble, calloused hands. Not a man who courted attention, but someone shaped by hard years, overlooked by the world, a quiet force of nature. You have family, she asked gently. His brow furrowed. Just my grandma in Baltimore. She's in a care home, Alzheimer's. I'm sorry, he shrugged or tried to. The movement made him wince. I'm used to it. Her phone vibrated again, ignored again. Elijah noticed, your people must be losing it. They'll live, she said. The only thing that matters is you, right now. He chuckled faintly. Don't hear that often. Then the nurse returned, gently reminding Maya that visitors were supposed to leave. The press was gathering outside. Her father was demanding answers, but Maya ignored them all. Her focus on this man, this stranger who had become the most important person in her world in a heartbeat. And here is something few stories tell: the simple truth, that when power collides with humanity, everything changes. Maya William, daughter of a billionaire heiress to an empire of glass towers and billion-dollar projects, sat in a plastic ICU chair holding the hand of a wounded maintenance man. And in that moment, titles meant nothing. Only life, only gratitude, only truth. And isn't that the real story beneath the headlines? Beneath the cameras, the quiet rediscovery of what truly matters. Her father finally arrived, Harold William, in his tailored suit. Fury and concern mixed in his eyes, demanding explanations. Stock prices crashing, PR teams, spinning damage control. But Maya met his anger with quiet steel. She no longer cared about the company, the board, or the market. She cared about the man who had bled for her on the sidewalk outside her father's office. And this is important because real change, personal or public, does not come from loud boardroom speeches. It comes from small, fierce choices like this one. Maya choosing the stranger's life over her father's empire. And I think of real-life moments like this too. Edward Snowden deciding to risk everything to reveal government surveillance abuses, Chelsea Manning exposing military misconduct, knowing the cost to their freedom. These are the crossroads where conscience stands against power, and Maya stood at hers. Elijah watched her as she returned to the room, her coat wrinkled, her hair loose, her eyes tired and determined. You came back so soon, he whispered. She smiled softly. I told you I would. He studied her, his gaze sharper, clearer than before. You sure you want to be around a guy who attracts gunfire? You didn't attract it. She said. You stopped it. His eyes softened and something unspoken passed between them, a connection forged in fear and blood and choice. A stranger who had become something far more in the space of a single morning. As sunlight streamed through the hospital window, casting soft golden lines across Elijah Boone's face, Maya sat quietly watching him. Her thoughts tangled in a strange mixture of relief, guilt, and something she couldn't name, yet the man who saved her life was no longer just a faceless hero or a bloody stranger on the sidewalk. He was Elijah, a man with a past, with quiet strength, and a story that reached far deeper than the bullet wound in his shoulder. She wanted to know him, to understand why he had done what no one else in her world would have risked. And as he blinked slowly, adjusting to the light, she finally asked gently, why did you do it, Elijah? Why would you risk your life for someone you didn't even know? His voice was rough, dry, but steady. Because you look scared, he said simply, and I've seen that fear before. I just moved without thinking. And that answer struck her deeper than any speech could have. This wasn't about fame or reward or recognition. It was instinct, pure, unfiltered human. Instinct to protect, to act. And it reminded her of something she had almost forgotten. Something the polished world of boardrooms and contracts had pushed out of her heart. That good people still existed. People who chose right over safe, even when the cost was everything. I want you to pause here and think. Because in a world flooded with news of selfishness, greed, violence, and cruelty, how often do we hear stories like this? How often are we reminded that there are still those who will stand between harm and a stranger without question, just like James Shaw Jr., who disarmed a mass shooter at a Tennessee Waffle House in 2018, saving countless lives, or Mamadou Gassama, The Malian migrant who climbed 4 stories in Paris to save a dangling child risking deportation and arrest because a life mattered more than fear. These are the quiet giants of our time, and Elijah Boone belonged among them. Maya leaned forward, her fingers lightly touching the edge of Elijah's blanket. "Do you have anyone to call?" she asked. "Family who should know you're here?" He sighed softly. "Just my grandma in Baltimore. She doesn't remember much anymore. Alzheimer's, I take care of the bills when I can." Maya's chest tightened. This was not the life of a man who should have been risking himself for her. This was someone struggling to stay invisible, to keep quiet, to carry burdens. No one saw, and yet here he was, in the center of a media storm, because he refused to let fear make him small. Elijah noticed her expression and gave a faint, crooked smile. "You're thinking too hard," he rasped. "Your people are probably losing their minds outside." "I've been ignoring them," she admitted quietly. "The only thing that matters right now is you," and that honesty surprised them both. Because when had a billionaire heiress ever said such a thing to a maintenance worker and meant it? But the truth was she did, because Elijah had stripped away the illusion of their worlds and left only the raw, undeniable fact that life and worth and value are not measured in money or titles, but in moments of courage and choice. The nurse returned, politely reminding Maya that the press was demanding answers. The board was panicking, her father was waiting. But Maya stayed seated, her fingers still resting near Elijah's hand. This man had taken a bullet for her, and she would not leave him now. Not for the cameras, not for the headlines. Because for once, the story that mattered was here in this quiet room, not out there in the shouting world. And that decision was about to change everything. Later that day, as the hospital bustled with whispered news of the shooting, Maya's father arrived, Harold William, in a dark suit. Anger and fear mixed in his eyes, demanding to know why she wasn't handling the media, the investors, the fallout. But Maya stood firm, her gaze steel cold as she faced him in the corridor. "This isn't about stocks or scandal," she said flatly. "This is about a man who saved my life while your trusted vice president hired someone to kill me." Harold paled momentarily before masking it in cold business control. "You have no proof," he hissed, but Maya smiled thinly. "I have enough, and more is coming. You taught me to cover my tracks. Dad and I did. But I also learned that truth matters more than power, and this time the truth would win." Her father said nothing, his eyes dark with calculations, but Maya turned and walked away. Her heart no longer chained to his empire, her mind no longer afraid, because Elijah Boone had reminded her what courage looked like, and now she would carry that flame forward. Back in the room, Elijah stirred, watching her return with that same quiet curiosity. "You keep coming back," he murmured. She smiled, sinking into the chair beside him. "I told you I would," and in that moment something shifted between them, something rare and fragile. The beginning of a trust built not on wealth or need, but on the simple shared truth of survival. "You know," she said softly, "the world thinks of people like you as invisible janitors, maintenance men, shadows who pass unnoticed. But you're the only reason I'm alive, and that makes you more important than any board member. Any CEO." Elijah blinked slowly, his lips curling in a faint smile. "Not used to being called important," he whispered. "Well, get used to it," she replied, "because your life matters, and I intend to make sure the world knows it." But Elijah's smile faded slightly, replaced by a flicker of unease. "The world doesn't need to know who I am," he said quietly. "They'll turn me into something I'm not." And in his voice was the weight of every veteran. Every worker, every man who had been used, discarded, overlooked, until the moment the cameras arrived. And I want you watching this to understand this truth, because it happens every day in America. Veterans returned home and forgotten. Factory workers silenced after injury. Whistleblowers buried under lawsuits, their bravery erased because their faces didn't sell papers or ratings. And Elijah knew that and feared it. But Maya only smiled gently, her hand resting on his. "You don't have to be anyone but who you are," she said, "and I will make sure no one changes that." And in that promise lay the seed of something new, something bigger than scandal or fame or corporate collapse. A quiet revolution that began not in courtrooms or headlines, but here in a hospital room where a stranger's courage lit a fire that could not be extinguished. As the sun set over Manhattan, casting long shadows across the hospital floor, Maya sat quietly beside Elijah's bed, her phone buzzing endlessly with messages from lawyers, PR team's board members, and her father. But she ignored them all because here in this small, quiet room was the only thing that mattered, a man who had risked everything without question and was now paying the price. Maya thought back to the warning left on her car window, to the whispered threats, and Philip Nor's cold smirk in the boardroom. She realized that Elijah's sacrifice had cracked open a door into something far darker than corporate rivalry. This was conspiracy, real and dangerous. And as she sat there listening to the quiet hum of machines, the truth settled heavily on her shoulders. Elijah had not been shot by chance. He had stepped into a war he did not understand, and for that she owed him not just gratitude but protection. Real protection, because the men who wanted her silenced would not hesitate to clean up loose ends, including him. I want you to stop and really think about this because it happens more often than we like to believe. Whistleblowers, journalists, good men and women who stumble onto corruption, only to vanish in the machinery of silence. And Maya knew that if she walked away now, Elijah would become another forgotten name, another casualty buried beneath headlines and business deals, and that was something she could not allow that night as Elijah slept. Maya called her old college friend Ava, now an investigative journalist for one of the country's largest papers, and told her everything: the conspiracy, the evidence, the attempted murder, the corruption at the heart of her father's empire. Ava listened in silence, then said simply, "I believe you," and just like that, the circle widened, a new ally drawn into the quiet rebellion against power. The next morning, as sunlight filled the room, Elijah woke fully for the first time, his eyes clearer, stronger, and he smiled faintly at Maya. "You stayed," he murmured. She nodded softly. "Of course I did." He watched her, his gaze thoughtful. "You're different than I expected, rich girl, like you supposed to run from this, not sit in a hospital chair all night." Maya smiled tiredly. "Maybe I've been living wrong until now. Maybe you reminded me what matters." He chuckled, winced, holding his shoulder. "Well, glad I could teach an heiress a lesson." But Maya leaned forward, serious now. "I need to ask you something. Elijah, have you ever served?" His eyes darkened slightly, the easy smile fading. "Army medic, Afghanistan, 2 tours, discharged for disobeying orders." She frowned. "Disobeying?" "I refuse to leave civilians behind," he said flatly. "My CO ordered us to pull out under fire. But there were kids trapped. I went back for them, cost me my rank, my future." And that truth hit Maya like a stone, because suddenly Elijah's courage made sense. It wasn't new or accidental. It was who he was, a man who chose right over orders, even when it cost him everything. She reached out, gently squeezing his hand. "You did the right thing." Elijah always remembered that, but he only smiled grimly. "Right. Doesn't matter when you're forgotten." Maya shook her head. "Not anymore. Not while I have breath, because you deserve more than silence and shame. You deserve truth, and this is the real moment." The shift where Maya William, the billionaire's daughter, became something else, someone willing to risk her empire, her reputation to make this right, because Elijah's story wasn't just his own. It was a mirror for every quiet injustice, every discarded hero, every hidden truth buried by power. Together they reviewed the files Maya had secretly copied before the attack documents, emails, contracts proving that Philip Noor had sold secrets to foreign developers, cut safety corners on skyscrapers, and ordered the hit on Maya when she discovered it. Elijah listened silently, absorbing the depth of the rot, then spoke softly. "They'll kill you for this." Maya met his gaze. "Not if I make it public. Not if I drag this into the light." And this is where the story reflects real life. Because corruption fears the spotlight, I think of Karen Silkwood, the nuclear plant worker who exposed safety violations only to vanish under mysterious circumstances, or Edward Snowden, forced into exile for revealing government surveillance. And Maya knew that if she wanted to survive, she had to make this story too big to bury, too loud to silence. Ava arrived later that day, her eyes sharp, her recorder ready. Maya handed her the files, watched as her friend read in growing horror. "This is massive," Ava whispered. "This is federal. This is international. And you're sure you want this out?" Maya nodded, her face set. "My father's fortune was built on lies. I won't let Elijah's blood be part of that." Ava turned to Elijah. You saved her life. How do you feel about becoming the face of this story? He shook his head slowly. I'm no hero, just a guy who got lucky. Maya leaned forward, correcting him. You are the hero, Elijah. Whether you like it or not, and the world needs to see you. And in that moment, something changed in him. The quiet acceptance that his story would no longer be hidden, that maybe, just maybe, his sacrifice would matter. As the article prepared for publication, Maya made another decision. She would confront her father at the upcoming charity gala, a glittering event where the city's elite would gather expecting smiles and speeches. But instead they would hear the truth, because sometimes justice requires breaking the script, turning the stage into a courtroom and making the powerful answer for their crimes. This was no longer about revenge or fear. This was about redemption, hers and Elijah's, and the countless others who had been hurt by her father's empire. The night of the charity gala arrived with glitter and gold. The grand ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel bathed in soft light. Crystal chandeliers sparkling above the heads of New York's most powerful as they gathered dressed in silk and velvet to celebrate the success of the William Corporation, unaware that beneath the sheen of champagne and whispered deals, a storm was building, a quiet reckoning waiting to break. Maya Williams stood in the dressing room, staring at herself in the mirror. The expensive gown, the flawless makeup, the perfect smile trained over years of public appearances. But none of it mattered tonight because she was no longer the daughter of Harold William, the real estate princess. Tonight she was something else entirely, a whistleblower, a truth teller, and in the small velvet box on the table lay the flash drive holding every secret, every crime, every betrayal she and Elijah had uncovered, the weight of a legacy built on deception. Meanwhile, across town, Elijah Boone sat quietly in a borrowed suit, the jacket loose on his frame, the tie awkward against his throat, his shoulders still bandaged, stiff with pain, but his eyes steady, watching the news scroll across the television screen, where commentators speculated on the mystery hero who had saved Maya William from assassination. But they did not know him, not yet, and part of him wanted to keep it that way, to slip back into the shadows unnoticed. But another part, the part forged in Afghan dust and moral fire, knew the truth, deserved more than silence. I want you to think about this moment because in real life, these choices shape history. Rosa Parks did not intend to spark a movement when she refused her bus seat. Frank Serpico did not seek fame. When he exposed police corruption, they simply chose truth when silence was easier. And now Elijah stood at that same crossroads. Back at the gala, Maya arrived, greeted by polite applause and curious glances. But her father, Harold, was waiting, his smile cold, his voice low. Are you really going to do this here? Now she met his gaze, unflinching. Yes, because here in front of your donors, your friends, your pawns is where they deserve to hear what you are. And with that, she stepped onto the stage, the room quieting, the cameras turning as she spoke calmly, clearly telling the story of corruption, blackmail, betrayal, and attempted murder, laying bare the rot beneath the empire her family had built. Gasps, murmured shock filled the air, but Maya continued, her voice rising, and then she introduced Elijah Boone, the man who had saved her life. Not a security guard, not a trained bodyguard, but a maintenance worker, a former soldier, a forgotten man who chose courage over safety, and who now stood beside her as a symbol of quiet heroism. The crowd turned as Elijah stepped forward, his limp, slow but steady, his face calm as he took the microphone and spoke. I'm not a hero. He said simply, I'm a man who made a choice to act when someone needed help. But what I didn't know then was that I was stepping into a war of greed and lies and silence, and I won't stay silent anymore. This company, this empire tried to silence her, tried to bury truth beneath money and power, but not anymore. Not today. And as his words hung in the air, the room shifted, the whispers stopped, the phones buzzed, news alerts exploding across the city as Ava's story went live, published to millions, exposing every detail of the William Corporation's crimes. And this is the moment that matters more than any boardroom, more than any court, because truth once spoken cannot be unspoken, like Daniel Ellsberg in the Pentagon Papers, like Aaron Brockovich, in Poisoned Water, when the people know they cannot unknow. Harold Williams stepped forward, fury in his eyes, but the flash of cameras, the rise of voices, the rush of reporters swept him back, the tide of revelation drowning him. And Maya turned to him one last time, her voice steady. You built this house of lies, Father. Now it falls, and with that, she took Elijah's hand, and they left the stage, the crowd parting silently as they walked into the cool night air, free at last from the chains of fear and secrecy. In the weeks that followed, arrests swept through the William Corporation board members, indicted Philip Noor, captured trying to flee the country, Harold William charged with conspiracy and fraud. But more importantly, Elijah Boone's name became known not as a mystery hero, but as a symbol of quiet courage. His story inspiring others to come forward. Whistleblowers, veterans, workers long silence, finding their voices. And this is where real life and story meet. Because it happens outside the spotlight in small towns and cities where truth struggles to rise. But when it does, the world changes. I think of John Kiriakou exposing CIA torture, or Sharon Watkins revealing Enron's lies, ordinary people who chose conscience over comfort. Maya and Elijah stood together at the courthouse steps as cameras flashed their faces. Calm, resolved, the founders of a new initiative, the Boone William Foundation for Justice, dedicated to protecting whistleblowers, defending veterans forgotten by the system, and giving voice to those the powerful would silence. And this is the lesson, the truth that remains for us all. That courage is not loud or grand. It is quiet, patient, persistent. It is the choice to stand when others kneel, to speak when others whisper, to act when others wait. And in that simple choice, the world shifts. As Maya spoke to reporters, her hand in Elijah's, she smiled gently. This isn't just our story. She said it's everyone's story, because corruption touches every life, injustice hides in every city, but so does courage, and every small act of truth brings light. And with that, they turned away, walking into a future unknown, but free, no longer strangers, bound by chance but partners, bound by purpose and hope.